Right, good morning, everyone. I see a couple new faces, so welcome. My name is Jez. I'm the programming librarian here. I want to mention a couple of upcoming programs before we get started. So tonight at 7 p.m., we have Wills Trust and Estate Planning. Jacob Aronsaft, we have him about twice a year because people always need this information. It's really important to plan ahead, get all your ducks in order. He goes through ways to do that, probate, all those things, whether it's for yourself or you're dealing with it for somebody else. And then he goes through some stories. He works in this field. He's really knowledgeable. Recommend that one. And then Monday at 1:30, we have our monthly memory cafe. So that is for folks with Alzheimer's, dementia, or other cognitive issues. So if you know anybody, let them know, bring them. We have a different theme every month. This month it's going to be poetry for National Poetry Month. We have different activities and share information to try to spark memories and keep the mind active and kind of help them through that process. A little bit about our presenter, actually about our program today, is we are hybrid. So many of you are here in person, some of you are watching online. If you're online, know that we're using the webinar format. It means you can see and hear us, but we cannot see or hear you. So if you have any issues, put those in the chat or send them, call the reference desk. We'll take questions at the end. So if you're here in person, write them down, keep them in mind. Online, you can put them into the chat or Q&A, and I will ask them aloud at the end. We've enabled the closed captioning online. So if you'd like to see that, click the CC button or the More button and click Show Captions. Here in person, we have enabled the listening systems. So if you would like to use one, we have some sets in the back. You can borrow them, gives you a little bit more control over the sound. And if you have the Listen Everywhere app on your phone or connected to your hearing aid, you can connect to that through the meeting room Wi-Fi. If you need to get up for any reason, just do so without disturbing those around you. And if you can silence cell phones, watches, whatever else might go off at some point. And then we'll get started. So a little bit about our presenter today. Tina Beaird is the owner of Tamarack Genealogy and is a genealogy and local history librarian at a mid-sized Chicagoland public library. She holds a Master's of Library and Information Science degree with a specialization in archives and preservation from Dominican University. Tina has won multiple research and digitization grants over the years to preserve and digitize historic documents and photographs. She lectures nationally on topics including genealogical methodology, military records, Scottish research, plus photo and archival preservation, and has assisted researchers for over 20 years. She is the first vice president of the Illinois State Genealogical Society and board director for the Oswego Land Heritage Association. She's also an active member of the American Library Association and the Society of American Archivists. And today she's going to share some of that knowledge with us about tracing your home's history. Welcome.
I do too much. Normally I have no problem projecting, but I'm getting over being sick this past week. So hopefully you can hear me. Hopefully there's no issues with that. I can try to project a little more than normal. I always joke that, I'm raised in an Italian family. We don't have an inside voice. So if you can't hear me, let me know. I will certainly try to speak a little louder. So kind of what Jess was alluding to, I wear a lot of hats. So at my library, I'm the genealogy and local history librarian. I have also been the museum collections chair for my local historical society. I'm on the board of another historical society. I do a lot of historic preservation work. This is the perfect time to do this lecture because next month is Preservation Month. So for those of you who belong to historic preservation groups, May is our show. Like this is where, we put all our eggs in one basket because that's when people are thinking about, preserving historic structures, not just your own houses, but your neighborhoods and your communities and making those the best possible versions of themselves. So this is a great time to be talking about this topic. And I have a little bit of experience in doing this over the past 25 years. So you'll start to see things like This House Matters campaigns or This Building Matters over the course of the next month around different communities. And basically, why do they matter? Why are we here? Why are we doing this? Because we want to feel a connection to our homes. We want to feel a connection to, again, our neighborhoods, our communities. We want to have that connection to maybe the house that we grew up in or the house that our grandparents built themselves, or the house that we currently live in because it's a historic home and we want to care for it and love it. There's a lot of different reasons for why, we're interested in the history of the property, but it's not just about the bricks and mortar. It's not just about the stone and, the lathing and the stairwells and the built-ins, right? It's about the lives that were lived in each and every one of these. So when we're talking about house histories, we're not just talking about this building was built in an Italianate style in 1877. We're talking about the hands that built it. We're talking about the children that were reared in it. We're talking about the tragedies that occurred within it, right? The celebrations, the mourning, all of that went on. So while we're going to talk about government records and how do you trace a property and, how do I look for physical records, property records, we're also going to talk about those things like those soft things, right? Newspaper articles, city directories, where we're getting rosters of names of people who live there, events that took place there, weddings that might have happened, deaths that might have happened, right? All of that kind of leads to and builds into the life that the house lives, right? Because it's not just about our memory, right? Places have memories, physical memories. And sometimes you'll hear people refer to that, like at places like Gettysburg, that the land has memory, or Wounded Knee, the land has memory, right? It kind of keeps that built into it. Oh, I broke it already, Jed. Not surprising. Technology and I are not friends. That's why I like historic preservation, right? But when you get started, what you want to think about is, what do you know about where you live? Or what do you know about where you're researching, the property that you're researching? So, it's easy to know the state you live in, the county you live in, right? The city you live in. But things like, do you know the township that you're in? It's the smallest unit of government in Illinois. Do you know the name of the neighborhood or the addition, right? So if you're in town, how many of you are physically in town, right? Do you know the name of your addition that you're in, right? Most people don't, right? If you're in a subdivision, oh, it's easy. I pass it every day as I come in and out. Well, I live in Oswego. I live just outside of downtown Oswego, and we live in Boland's Addition. Nobody would know that unless you were going and, reading the legal description on your property, or you've gone and you've done that research, right? So knowing that type of information is going to help you pinpoint those things when you're looking at maps and other types of resources. We usually know our legal description if we've purchased our property, but if you're a renter, you might not have that handy. So what you would be able to do is find that legal description through government sources, which I'm going to talk about. PIN numbers, which are your property identification numbers, are relatively recent. They didn't really use PIN numbers before the 1950s. So you can do that PIN research back to a certain point online, but at some point you're going to have to go to the legal description. You're going to have to research it back from there. Do you know that legal descriptions can change? If you used to have a 50-foot front yard and the village comes in and says, we're going to widen this to 4 lanes, and now you have a 30-foot front yard, your legal description changes. So sometimes you might have to, kind of find yourself down the rabbit hole trying to decipher, is this still the same property? Because the legal description isn't exact. It's not the same as what you know it to be now. If you, like I said, if you know the subdivision name of your property, it makes it a little easier. If your neighborhood, where you live has a specific neighborhood name, that helps. If you know the age of the home, that's helpful. If there's a defined architectural style, we were talking about colonials earlier, right? Or bungalows or I-frames or A-frames or, my favorite are Italianates, arts and crafts, Frank Lloyd Wright, prairie style, right? If you know the name, the style of your house, it's a very defined period in time, which kind of gives you a window of when you're going to be searching. So all of those things kind of help lead you in the right direction. So as we talk about those types of things, which I'm going to talk about in more detail, where am I going to look? You're going to start with the Recorder of Deeds office, because you're not going to be able to do property research, whether it's a building, a gas station, a house, a farm, without visiting the Recorder of Deeds office. That's where the legal paperwork resides for deeds and mortgages and all of that. But other places that have information, the tax assessor, my grandma Nellie, God rest her soul, said there's two things in life you can't get out of: death and taxes. So lots of communities have really, really good tax assessment records that were done annually. The clerk of circuit court, or in some states, the probate court, right? Somebody passes away and passes their home along to their children, or divides the farm in half, or sells the business after the death of the retail owner. That type of information is going to be available through wills and probate through the circuit court. Historic preservation commissions, some are better than others. Some people heard my tales of woe about my community historic preservation commission earlier. They would have information. I'll talk about that in more detail. Every county has a land use and GIS department. I'll talk more about that towards the very end. I'm proud of you for being here at the library or connecting to the library from home. So libraries and historical societies are really, really valuable in this research that you're going to be doing, because we're the ones that have the social history. We're the ones that have those newspapers and those city directories and maybe those letters and diaries and graduation announcements and all of those things that are going to mention physical property and actual people and where they reside. And then don't underestimate the usefulness of universities and colleges. So I'm going to use Elmhurst University. When did that happen? As I was growing up, it was always Elmhurst College, right? The same could be said. I graduated from high school in Lisle and Illinois Benedictine College. People say Benedictine University, and I'm like, where is that? Or I graduated from Dominican, which was Rosary College. So whenever Elmhurst, somebody's got to tell me later when Elmhurst became Elmhurst University. Last couple of years, okay. Because I went to the website, I was like, Elmhurst College, that doesn't exist. Okay. So congratulations on becoming a university. But universities and colleges have special collections. So if they focus and highlight architecture, they're going to have a lot of information about architecture within their community, because they're going to send their architecture students out to do research and reports. But then they also have special collections, and not just things like yearbooks, which I'll talk about a little later, right, about the residents who go to Elmhurst College, but they usually have map collections. Sometimes they have business collections that have been donated to the university to help the business school. So there's a lot of local history available through colleges and universities as well. So I'm near Aurora University. Same thing. Aurora University has a lot of information on Aurora, Montgomery, Oswego, Caneland, all of these small communities that surround the city of Aurora, because, just through the course of their history, they've kind of amassed these things in their collections. So these are the places we're going to look, and these are the places we're going to talk about. But then what types of things am I looking for when I go to these places? So when I go to the Recorder of Deeds office, I'm going to be looking for things like deeds and mortgages, but then I'm also going to be looking for things like incorporations. So was your house a business? So did the doctor incorporate his ophthalmology business as that address? So I'd be looking for that. Do you live in a building that was a decommissioned church? That church would have to be incorporated, or a business, right? Or the old Masonic Lodge building, or whatever it happens to be. There's paperwork for that. There's always maps. So there's maps of the subdivision, there's maps of the addition, there's maps of the original town. Sometimes even things like cemetery maps are available. So they've got a lot of that type of paperwork, not just deeds and mortgages. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about mortgages in a little bit. Talked about the circuit clerk or the probate, because if I'm looking for wills or probate, I want to make sure that I'm finding in this business, when we're doing house research or property research, we're looking for what's called the clean chain of title. So you want to be able to show how property is changing hands from the inception of it till today. So wills and probate documents are going to help with that, because they're going to show how a property is changing hands if somebody passes away. And then that property cannot be sold until the heirs either decide it needs to be sold, or somebody purchases it back from the estate. So there's going to be those types of things associated with it. And then personal and real estate taxes. Did you know historically, when the tax assessor came to your door, he was assessing your real estate value, but then he was also assessing your personal estate as well? So you were being taxed on if you had goats or horses or cows or pigs. You were being taxed if you had a carriage or a wagon. You were being taxed if you had a sewing machine, a clock, or a watch in your house. And in some communities, they tax you if you had dogs. So personal real estate is really important also. And the reason that's important is because if I'm a tenant farmer, I'm never going to show up on a map because I don't own it. Only the owner of the farm is going to show up on a map. But if I'm the renter and I've rented it for 50 years, I'm never going to show up on a plat map anywhere. But where am I going to show up? I'm going to show up in those tax documents because it's going to show me living at this address. The owner's paying the real estate tax. I'm paying the taxes on my horses and my cows and everything else. So real estate taxes are only a portion of that tax record that could be valuable to you. Permits and surveys. I apologize. I don't know about DuPage County specifically, if DuPage County keeps their building permits historically or not. In Will County, where I work, they only keep them for 5 years. In Cook County, they have them back to the January after the fire. They have them back to January 1872. So it depends on the community. Apologize, I don't know DuPage County specifically, but building permits that are done might be available to you. So if you know you've got a addition, you've got a solarium, you've got a sunroom, whatever's added to your property, there's an addition put on the back, you can go back and look for those building permits to see if they're still available. Some communities will do historic property surveys, or what they call dashboard surveys. I'll talk about those a little bit later on, where they basically drive around and mark historic properties in potential landmark districts. So I'll talk about where to find those. Newspapers. Well, I apologize, I couldn't find any Elmhurst newspapers online before 1962. Newspapers are a great resource for finding information about when a house is built, if a house catches fire, if an addition is put on, if some change is made to the property. Newspapers are the place to go. Because in small towns, even though Elmhurst technically isn't a small town any longer, when you're in a community this size or 100 years ago, then everything shows up in the newspaper. Little Johnny down the street falls off his bike, breaks his leg, it's in the newspaper. The mailman gets bit by the Smith's dog on his mail route, it's in the newspaper. So if somebody makes a change or builds a property or paints the outside or puts up a fence, it's in the paper. So you can use that as a documentary evidence to the change of the structure of your property. City directories, they have upstairs. Newspapers, they have a microfilm upstairs as well. City directories are going to show you year by year exactly who's in that property. So you get a list of residents, not just the owners. So I go to the recorder of deeds office and I see who purchased the property in 1956. But that doesn't mean that that purchaser is the one that lived there. So city directories are going to show you who's at that address. So if they're there and they're living with their family or their in-laws or their cousins, you're going to see everybody at that address. And I'm going to talk about atlases and gazetteers because those are available online for Elmhurst and for DuPage County in York Township. Those have a lot of good, again, they're the maps, they're the landowners, they're the physical people who are the owner of the property. Have any of you ever used fire insurance maps before? So Sanborn is just a brand name. It's like Kleenex. And Sanborn is typically the company that was in Illinois doing research, but they're not the only company. And I'm going to show you some example of fire insurance maps and how those can benefit you as well. Like when you're returning a house back to its original structure, you're taking off siding or removing an addition. Those are the maps you want to use. And then if you are lucky enough to have photos, historic photos of your property, that's the holy grail. They're virtually impossible to come by, especially interior photos. So if you visit your library, your historical society, your historic preservation commission, and somebody has those photos, that's absolute gold because they're virtually impossible to come by. You'll find tons of photos of historic business district, but finding individual photos of property can be a lot more difficult. So now that we know the agencies we're going to visit, and now that we know the types of records we're going to look for, how do we get started? Like I mentioned, send a message to the clerk's office and say, do you keep building permits? Reach out to the city or the village. Do you keep building permits? If so, for how long? Are these accessible? Can I search them by address? Or I know the name of the person who did the addition. Can I search it by name? Reach out to that local land use office and ask them if they've done a neighborhood survey, if they've driven around and looked at areas to designate as landmark neighborhoods or as historic districts in your community. GIS usually has multi-layer maps that you can access online. Some of them designate historic districts directly on them. So like Schaumburg is a great example, Schaumburg Township, because the GIS maps will list all the roads, all the railroads, the school district boundaries, the fire protection district boundaries, the police, district boundaries, right? All on a map that you can choose what layers you want to see. And some communities will take the time, and if they don't, ask them to do it, to put a historic layer in there, because they can do that for you as well. And then it helps you see automatically. Here are all the places that they designated as being 50 years or 75 years older, right? So you know right away where those potential districts are, or if your house falls into one. Like I said, I can't do what I do for a living without libraries and historical societies. So you want to reach out to them and ask them for help. Some have them broken down by neighborhoods. Some have street files. So Ottawa Street, Virginia Street, Addison Street, whatever it is, they'd have a file for all the information they've collected throughout their decades on that street. Chicago History Museum does the same thing. So if you live down Western Avenue, there's a big fat folder of all of the photos they have for the houses and properties along Western Avenue. See if they've got that. If they don't have it broken down by address or by neighborhood, you're going to go through city directories. You're going to go through newspapers, and you're going to have names. Do you have family files on any of these people? Are there photographs with those, right? Maybe it's a birthday party and they're in the backyard and you get a great view of the back of the house. No photo is unimportant when you're trying to pinpoint changes and additions or other things done to a particular property. Some of them even have rosters of kit homes. Sears is just the most well-known, but we're not the only game in town. So do they have a roster of homes that were built by mail, that were kit homes, or by an important architect, right? We live in the Chicagoland area. Everything's Frank Lloyd Wright. But there were lots of other architects who were building in the area too, and some that would be historically significant to Elmhurst. There's a lovely book upstairs on display in the local history cabinet about a local architect, right? Is your house one of that architect's books? Houses, and it's in that book, right? You want to make sure you're looking at those types of things too. Like I said, reach out to Elmhurst University. Wow, that's such a change in my brain to say Elmhurst University. Reach out to them and see, do you have maps? Do you have other business information? Do you have anything on this family? If a surgeon lived in your house, or, a dairy farmer, who ran a dairy in Addison do they have anything on that business? Ask them what type of information they might have. So like I said, in Illinois and across the US, properties are given an identification number to help trace that particular parcel. PIN numbers can change as well. So if you have a double lot and you sell off half of that lot, the PIN numbers are going to be different. So you have to keep in mind that this is a starting point. It's not an ending point. So even if you have a PIN now and you can go on to the tax assessor's website and put in that PIN number, or you can go to the recorder of deeds website and put in that PIN number, you have to make sure, has this been divided? Has there been a change? Look at the legal descriptions. So print out anything that you find on the website and track to see if the description changes. If the tax assessor does not have the records far enough online, go to the tax assessor's office and say, can I look at the original note cards, or can I look at the original files for that particular property or PIN number or that legal address? Most of the time they're going to say yes, unless they don't have them, because the state only requires them to keep them for so long. So in some communities, they either donate them, they give them to the state archives, they donate them to the local historical society, and in some communities, they just throw them away. I'm looking at you, Will County. So it depends on where you are or the research that you're doing, but ask them, can I look at these originals? Because what the tax assessor, and I'm going to show you some examples, are going to be things like changes and additions, right? If somebody files a building permit to put a second story on a house, right? Tax assessor wants to know about it because they want to make sure that you're paying the additional taxes on that structure. So you can find when a house gets built on a lot by looking at how the tax value changes. Because I could buy a lot and I might pay $400 in taxes on that vacant lot. But as soon as I put a structure on it, the value, the tax assessment is going to change. And you can use that to kind of hone in on when big changes are made to a property. Again, reach out to GIS and land use and ask them, do you have aerial maps? Did they do photographs? Did they do aerial images of the community throughout the years? Do I have access to those? Can I look at the original land and road survey books, right? We always see the land crews out there, right, with their little surveying kits. Anytime a new home, an old home is torn down and a new home is built, or when they're looking at widening the road, they keep all of those records. And sometimes they'll have those records back to the establishment of the township, which is 1850 in Illinois. The township system was established in 1850. And sometimes they even go back to countyhood, which in DuPage County is 1841, 36, 41, I think 41, give or take a couple of years. So they name these roads after families, right? So when we're looking at the streets surrounding us, they're typically named after families. So those really, really early road surveys and bridge surveys were done by those families. They wanted to get to downtown to sell their goods. They wanted to get to the river or to the railroad in order to, sell their wheat or their corn or whatever they were growing. So looking at those really old surveys, which typically aren't online because they don't want to take the time to digitize them because they don't want to have to transcribe the handwriting, right? They're still handwritten, they're not typed. They've got these original books in their collections. So if they don't have them for York Township, you check and see if DuPage County has them. If DuPage County says, no, we don't have them, where are they? Did they get donated to the DuPage County Historical Society? Did they get donated to the state archives? And they're within the collections in Springfield. So you just want to follow the path of where those records went. So here in DuPage County, in Wheaton, if you go to the courthouse, the recorder of deeds is the person that we're going to stop and visit. At some point, we have to go to the courthouse and go through the recorder's records. But like I already mentioned, we're not just looking for the deed. We're not just looking for that property sale from one person to the other. We're looking for things like transfers, right? Quit claim deeds. Dad quit claim deeds the house to his spouse because he's ill and he's worried he might die, or quit claim deeds the house to his kids because he's moving to Florida, right? You're looking for those two. You're looking for affidavits and liens and assignments. Does somebody owe money and the business put a lien against the property so they can't sell it until the debt is paid off? One of my favorite liens that I've ever seen. Out in Wheatland Township in Will County, there was a tippling house. You know what a tippling house is? It's a bar. And the bar was directly across the street from the Presbyterian church. So the Presbyterian minister, called the police and said, I want you to shut this bar down because they're serving liquor on Sunday mornings when men should be in church. Well, it was illegal at the time to have a bar open on Sunday mornings. So the police came, shut down the bar. Well, they had a lien put against their property by Anheuser-Busch because if the bar was closed, they didn't pay Anheuser-Busch the money for the beer that they had bought to sell to the men who should have been in church. In 1904, Anheuser-Busch put a lien against the house for $1,000. That's a lot of beer that these Scots were drinking instead of being in church. So they could not sell the property until the lien was paid off. That's my favorite lien. That's a lot of beer money. But those types of things, right? Did a roofer not complete their work and a lien's put against the business until the roof is finished? Or did you not pay the construction company, so the construction company puts a lien against your property until it's paid? So there's lots of reasons why liens can show up against properties. Affidavits and assignments, those are usually associated with heirship and probate. An affidavit saying that, yes, I am the lawful descendant of or child of this particular person. I'm entitled to a portion of the estate. Or an assignment where they come to an agreement and they say, all right, eldest brother John's going to get the property. We're going to get cash. right? Those are the types of things you'll find in there as well. I already talked about incorporations as well, but now in this day and age, a lot of families are using land trusts as well, or they're leaving money to like conservation foundations. So you'll see things that are in blind trusts. That's what those types of things are as well. So you can find those at the recorder's office. So a lot of these are accessible online. It depends on where you live. So I was on the recorder's website last night looking up the house I grew up in. And, those records were on there back to 1960. So for DuPage County, you have access to a lot of this already. You can kind of do this property research back to that time. Then you're going to have to slog over there and you're going to have to go through the books. But if you trace your property back far enough, you're going to get to the original land patent, which is the purchase of the property directly from the federal government. So that could be for a variety of reasons. That could be a military land patent. That can be under the Homestead Act grant in 1862. That could be Native American lands, reservations being opened up in Illinois. Where I live in Oswego, there were 2 reservations. One of those subdivisions, is on Reservation Road. Where'd the name come from? The people who owned it. Those records are in Washington, D.C. at the National Archives. So if I'm buying land directly from the government, that very first purchase is a federal record. If I turn around and I sell it to you, it becomes a county record and it's at the recorder's office. And if you keep it for 30 years and then sells it to you, still a county record. Only that first purchase, when I buy it from the federal government, would that be in Washington, D.C. Sometimes you can find those filed at the county recorder's office. And the reason being is because historically you're buying a piece of property, 1836, 1841, 1852, house fires, tornadoes, any kind of disaster, right? You don't have a safe you can put it in. A lot of times they'll file a copy with the county for safekeeping. So sometimes you can still find them. So when I talk about legal descriptions and I talk about section, township, range, so before I explain this, let's go ahead one. So in this particular record, it tells me that this is lot 104, right, in Monroe's edition. This is in Will County. This is in the city of Joliet. And it tells me that this piece of property is in the southwest quarter of the northeast quarter of section 11 in township 35. So York Township is 40, or don't remember exactly specifically, but basically the township would be at the top of the map, and sometimes you could see it on the south. So yeah, township 40. So York Township, where you all are now, is township 40. And then these are the sections. So when somebody talks about the northeast quarter, right, they're talking about this section right here. So if you divide this in 4s, quarter, 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 northeast, southeast, northwest, southwest, right? And you could see there are property owners listed on this. So this is just a DuPage County property map that's in the 1874 atlas that is upstairs. These are digitized and available online. They're in your handout. So I give you the links to the 1874 and I think it's the 1904 DuPage County atlases. So you can pull these up directly through, I'll talk about Ida, Illinois a little later on. So you would see this exact same map. I just drilled in so I could blow it up a little bit for you. But each section in Illinois, when they created the township system, is a square mile. So I chopped it off a little. So like from here to here is a square mile. From here to here is a square mile. Here to here is a square mile. So it's 1 square mile. 640 acres. There's not going to be a quiz. I'm not going to ask you to remember that number. But, so 120, 120, 120, 120. And then they get subdivided. So you'll wind up with crazy things like the northeast quarter of the southwest quarter of the east half of, section 8. Grab a map. The beauty is it's always going to be in that spot. From 1850 to today, if it tells you that it's in the northeast quarter of section 35 is always going to be in that same place. So you can flip through maps pretty quickly. Nope, not there. Nope, not there. Nope, not there. Different family name. Or yes, there. Oh, different family name 40 years down the road. Why? Is it a daughter-in-law? So it's still in the family, like just the daughter got married and now has a different name. Did they sell it outright? Those are the types of things you're looking for. And I apologize, this is so super tiny that you can't really see, but you've got case, you've got, it looks like glue, Vinny, like there's, and you might recognize these family names as the names that the streets of the neighborhoods are named after as well. But that legal description could potentially change. If they owned an entire section in 1850, and then by 1950, they only have a sliver of it, that legal description is going to change every time they sell off a portion of that property. Does that make sense? So legal descriptions are really, really helpful because it tells me, okay, I'm looking for Township 35, which is Joliet, looking for Section 11 within Township, 11, which is the city of Joliet. And then that principal meridian, Illinois is split in 3 lines. There's the first, the second, and the third principal meridian. And it just helps kind of keep track of where we are in the state. So for us, it's always going to be third principal meridian. If you're out west, it's going to be first. If you're in central Illinois, it's going to be second. And there's plenty of information available. There's a link at the end that talks about, in your handout, that talks about the township system that kind of explains what those mean, what the purpose of those was. But it was just really a way for the land use department in Illinois to kind of keep track of parcels that were being sold historically. So you could go, if you're doing research in Cook County, right, you're just across the border, you're in Franklin Park, right, or you're in Kane County, or you're in one of these other townships. This is all of the recorders, local recorders that you would access. If you find that you get back to that first government purchase, Bureau of Land Management, they're called GLO records, it's Government Land Office, and then BLM, Bureau of Land Management, are the people who have those records. And I'll show you an example of both. So I was looking at my family. So my maiden name is Tatara. So I went in, I wanted to see. So I went to the DuPage Recorder of Deeds website. I plugged in Tatara. I wanted to see what was out there, right? And it brought up a whole long list of different people. Each one of these categories can be sorted. So if I wanted to sort just simply by the legal description, or if I wanted to sort by the date, in my case, I sorted by date. The names of the property buyers, the names of the sellers, and the document type. You see, you've got mortgages, you've got deeds, quitclaim deeds. You'll find affidavits, you'll find probates listed in here. So if you're going through this and you see probate or affidavit or assignment, that's a clue. You're going to go back to the circuit court and look for those probate records for that. Or it'll say lien or judgment, mortgage release. It's been paid off, right? You'll see mortgage releases listed. And then you could click on each one of these and it takes you to like a bulleted point of what it was. You don't see the original in DuPage County, unfortunately. Some counties you do. So in Cook County, you see the original. McHenry County, you see the original. And it's got, copy emblazoned across the center of it. But at least I could see a little bit of additional information on any of these. And you have access to that from home. You don't have to be at the recorder. But you see that first date that Tatara shows up, right? If I knew that my family was here earlier than that, it means I've got to go in person and look through the books because they're not digitized back that far. So Bureau of Land Management, same thing. I can put in a name. I can put in the legal description if I have it. So if I know it's section 16 in Township 40, I can put that in and see everybody who purchased property from the federal government in that county, section, township, and it brings up a list. Again, sortable the same way, name, date, section, and it gives me each of those owners. So this is Will County, so I sorted alphabetically, so I can see that Cyrus Ashley bought several parcels. Here are the dates from 1841 all the way down to 1845. Here's the sections. He's buying first he buys the northwest quarter, then he buys the southwest quarter, then he just buys the rest of it until he owns the entire section. And then if I wanted, I could click on each one of those and it'll take me to the record. So now don't be deceived by the Bureau of Land Management. All they're showing you is the final page of the purchase application. So that's where the legal description is, and that's where the signatures are of the parties participating. Grant didn't sign this document. Lincoln didn't sign this document. It's somebody from the Land Bureau signing on the president's behalf. You're not getting Ulysses S. Grant's signature. But you're getting your ancestor's signature or the original purchaser of your farmstead's signature, which is kind of cool. But at the top, if you want the whole application, which can be anywhere from 6 to 16 pages long, you take this number and you contact the National Archives. How many pages it is, and provide you with that document. All I'm looking at is that legal description, right? That it's section 3 in the township of 36. If you want to see the whole thing, you just have to ask for it. And that number is right there available for you. Does that make sense? So if you're lucky enough to get to that point where you've traced it all the way to the beginning, you'll have to get the original copy from Washington, D.C. So what about those records that are online? I've looked, they're only online back to 1960. What do I do now? I go to the recorder's office, and there's 2 types of books. So they have the alphabetical list of the buyers and the sellers, the index, right? So I'm going to pull out the AB index and look for Beaird and look for all the Beards who bought property in Kendall County. Or they have them broken down by either original town or the township section. So you want to look at both because you want to make sure you don't miss somebody in the transactions. When you look at the grantee and grantor indexes, it's basically, Jones buys from Smith, Smith buys from Mitchell, Mitchell buys from Clark, right? And you're kind of jumping back and forth between the books to find the buyer and then the seller. Like they bought it in 1977, they sold it in 1990. I've got to go to the 1990 book and look for them as the seller to find out who the buyer is, and then eventually look for that buyer as the seller and just kind of step it backwards. If they have those section books, does that make your life easier? Because if you know it's section 11, you just pull the book for section 11. Okay, they're in the northeast quarter. You flip to the section that's the northeast quarter, and you just look for all the sales. Everybody's lined up. Yeah, they might not all be yours, right? There could have been 7 families that lived in the northeast quarter, but it makes your life so much easier. So if they have the section books, or if it's a property in town, right, and on the legal description that it's block 6, lot 12, right? You're going to pull out the original town book. You're going to open it up, look for your addition, and then you're going to look for lot 6, lot 12, and look for all the sales associated with lot 12. And it's so much easier. You want to do both because you want to make sure you don't miss somebody in the transactions, because sometimes I ran into this in Plainfield where a woman buys a piece of property in downtown Oswego, which eventually became the Opera House block, which became the biggest building in town, and she didn't register it with the recorder's office for 44 years. Because she's like, well, I know I own it. It was only when somebody contested, does she really own it? Like, we want proof, that she had to go in and finally file the deed that she had purchased the property. So sometimes, very rarely, are they ever in order. So you have to make sure you go through it, because it might be 5 or 6 years later and then somebody pencils it in, right? And it's not always chronological. So you just want to double check. So that's why looking at both comes in handy. Those circuit court documents that I talked about, right? In that will and probate, they have to give the precise legal description of their real estate. So if they own multiple parcels of property in town, or if they own multiple parcels of property across the country, it has to be accounted for. So even if I live in Kendall County, Illinois, but I own a summer home, wouldn't that be fabulous, in Pueblo, Colorado, it would still be in my will and in my probate in Kendall County, because they have to show that I legally own it. And then a copy of that gets filed in Pueblo. So when the family decides to sell it, they can show, yes, here's the probate, here's the legal description, here's the value of the property, and here's when and how it was sold. So you can find in wills property all over. Sometimes internationally, I've seen some Scottish ones where they still own the farmstead in Scotland, and it has to be accounted for. And here it is written in the will. This is just one example of 3 pages of property that this particular person owned. And it tells me here's the description, that it's in the northwest corner of, Township 36, Range 9, east of the 3rd meridian, which, because that's our part of the state, and gives me the legal description. It'll also include chattel and personal goods as well. So I'm sure you've looked at wills and probate where like all the household goods are listed, right? Where it tells you the bedsteads and the silverware and the chairs and the furniture and all of that. Both are equally important because if things were left on the property and they're still part of the home that you live in, you want to be able to document that this is original to the home, right? If it's a barn or if it's um, a water tower or something that's still original to the structure, it's going to be listed here. So you want to be looking for those kinds of things as well. Usually there's big red flags if, somebody gets a part of the estate that they're unhappy with, they might sue the estate. So eldest brother John inherits dad's farm and each of the siblings gets $50 and the youngest daughter gets $1 because she married a man that dad didn't like, so he wrote her out of the will. Or I've even seen it, they were never attentive to mother and father, so we're writing them out. Like I've seen this written in wills, and then they sue the estate because they want their fair share. So you'll find all of those kinds of things. In the probate will usually be a flag that there's a lawsuit, and then you would go to chancery or small claims court. Or if there's a fence line dispute, historically 2 neighbors were arguing over where the edge of their driveway was. Somebody puts up a fence and somebody else is angry about it. They're going to take them to chancery or small claims court. You're going to find those records, property records. It's very, very common. Chancery court is usually equity court. It's not money changing place. It's just equity. It's fairness. So if somebody, puts up a fence and it's not their property to put up a fence, they're not going to go through criminal court. They're going to go through either chancery or small claims court to have that settled. So you're looking for those kinds of things. One of my personal favorites are chattel mortgages. Has anybody heard that term, chattel mortgage? So let's say I'm broke and I want to put an addition on my house, or I want to buy the farm next to me because they're moving and it's for sale and I want to expand my farm. But I don't have the cash to just buy the property outright. So I'm going to go to you. You're the wealthiest woman in town. And I'm going to say, can I borrow money from you to buy this parcel of land? And you're going to say, absolutely, but what's your collateral? Right? And I'm going to say, well, I have 4 goats. I have 20 acres of wheat in the field. I've got a carriage. I've got, a fancy bedstead, right? And I'm going to put all of that up as collateral. And you're going to say, all right, I'm going to lend you this money at, if they're kind, 6% interest. If they're jerks, 10.5% interest, right? You're going to see how nice they were. And then if I don't pay you back in 18 months, you get all of it. These are fantastic. And you'll find them in township records. You'll find them in justice of the peace records because they're not official documents. It's just, it's a promissory note between the two of us. But you will find a lot of like really cool information about the property in these. So you kind of hope that they're almost broke, because then you're finding out like, I have a calf, a red calf with a white star on its head, or I have a mare who just had 2 foals and I'm going to put these, one's a black foal, one's a brown foal, right? And they're describing the property. These are fabulous. If you can find them, again, either at the township or at the county, these are wonderful records to look for. And if I pay, then the bill is paid and nothing else happens. If I don't, then you get all my cows. And, then I have to probably move because I no longer have any money and I have to sell. So you look for those kinds of things. Tax assessor and treasurer's records, again, are another example. This is one that's Kane County, for example. Kane County has a lot of their records already available online. But if there's any changes to the property, I can kind of scroll through and see the types of changes that were done. Does somebody get a homestead exemption? Do they get a senior exemption? Were they getting a military exemption? Or any changes made to the property tax structure? Did somebody petition? Has anybody ever petitioned to get your taxes lowered? Did it work? Whew, I am so chicken. Like, I'm so afraid to do it. because I'm afraid they're going to be like, oh, we're sorry, we're wrong. You owe us 3 times in taxes. Like, I'm not willing to take that bet yet. But any type of correction or addition that would be listed in these types of records. Again, they only go back to a certain point. So at some point you want to reach out to the tax assessor or the treasurer, like if you're in the city of Chicago, it's not really the assessor, it's the treasurer who handles those. And you want to ask those questions and see what they've got. Here is an example. I talked about real estate and personal property. Here's an example of one. This is in, this is down by Moni. They've been digitized by Governor State University, and I can go through their old tax records. So some of these are the owner of the property, but some of them are renters. But it tells me like how many cows do you have? How many horses do you have? You know, how much do you have in like personal value? Like how much cash do you have on you? And then what's cool about it is there's a category for like what school district are you in? Because then I can go and look for school records for the kids, right? I'm doing a house history, right? Not just property history. So if I know what school district the kids are in, I'm going to look for those one house school records for photos of the family members who went there. If they had a dog, again, tells a little bit of backstory, right? Those are the categories that they're going to list. So I can see that, the Mueller family has, 4 horses valued at $160. They've got 10 cattle, they've got 2 sheep and 4 hogs. So they're pretty well off. I mean, then you've got like poor Anna Meyer, who might just be a widow, who has 2 cows, 2 dairy cows that she uses to survive, right? And they're only valued at 24. So you'll definitely see the socioeconomic status of the farm or the owner, right? If they've got clocks and watches and sewing machines and carriages and all these fancy things, they're doing pretty well. If they own 1 hog and they use it for bacon because they eat it in the fall, they're pretty broke, right? They don't have a carriage, they walk everywhere. So that tells you a lot about the people who are living on the property as well. So you want to make sure you're looking for those. Yes. Right? Because there aren't donkeys, right? They haven't had babies yet. But yes, so pardon the terminology. But in your area, reach out to land use. Again, ask them, do they have those historic property surveys? Do they have any of these tax records? Do they have those road and bridge books that I talked about earlier? They have the more modern subdivision plats and surveys. So if you live in a subdivision now, but you want to research the farm that the subdivision, replaced, they're going to have those kind of records for you. So just a couple of examples of things. I kept Kane County in here. Another good example to use if you're thinking about doing like landmark nominating and things like that. They've got a really good guide that they have available to them. Just some ways to kind of see the process and what they ask for. So if your community, if it's in Elmhurst or outside of Elmhurst, does Elmhurst have any properties that are national landmarks? Okay.
I know for a fact. I think it was just a little bit more of St. Charles. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's right down the street.
So if you're lucky enough that a property you're living in has been nationally landmarked, those records are available through the National Park Service. Lord help us try to get records out of the National Park Service right now because there's nobody there. I'll get off my soapbox. But they had been digitizing things since the start of COVID. So you might be able to get that landmark nomination where they did that history for you. So it's 50, 60, 70 pages of research that somebody did to prove the historical significance of a property. So if you're lucky enough that there's a national, and the link should be in your handout on the last page. If not, you just want to look up National Trust for Historic Places or National Landmark and download that survey that somebody filled out because it's going to tell you, did Lincoln sleep here? Was it a famous architect like Frank Lloyd Wright? What historical significance? Like, was a treaty signed here, right? It's going to give you all that information. Somebody would have done that homework. And then locally, there are lots of communities that do local landmarking. And when they do that same process, they're going to go and they're going to do a chain of title. So you're going to get everybody who lived at that property. You're going to get information about the families there and why it's historically significant. So there's things that they look for. Is it the last, is it the best example of an architectural style? Best Queen Anne, best Italianate? Is it the last example of a historical style? That'll get you landmarked. If it's, you know, the last mid-century modern home, because they've all been torn down, that qualifies. Is it, again, a Lincoln slept here moment where somebody really important owned it or lived there? Is it historically significant because of some historic event? Like there's 7 criteria that they look at in order to landmark a historic structure. So, you know, it can't just be, well, it's old and it's kind of cool looking. Like there's criteria involved with that process. So if it's already been landmarked, somebody's done that work. So you can get a copy of that record. And then these commissions will typically go and do these surveys, these dashboard surveys, where they'll go around the community or around the township or around the county, and they kind of mark, here are the buildings we think are important. Here are the people, the families, the farms, the owners who are contributing, meaning we'll give you whatever we have, or non-contributing. No, we're not going to provide you anything. Whether they deem that the building or something on the property is historic. It could be a barn. It could be an outhouse. It could be any number of things. It doesn't have to be the home itself. And then what they'll do is they'll ask those contributing families, all right, what do you got? We've got old photos, you know, we've got modern photos. In some cases, like in this particular one, the Steiner family, if there's a survey, read it, because it might tell you everything you need to know for where to look. So the Steiner family, it tells me right here that this piece of property was in the Steiner family for 75 years. I just saved myself probably 3 hours worth of research because I know I'm not going to find any sales in the Recorder of Deeds records between, you know, the 1920 and 1975, right? So it's going to save me time. So you go through and you read these surveys, but then I've got the names, I've got photos, I've got all kinds of cool stuff. So you want to look for these dashboard surveys or guides or rural structures, as they're called. Here, they're usually called urbanized core or downtown surveys, are what they're called within cities. Where do we find these? Again, you're going to see if the village hall has a copy, the Historic Preservation Office has a copy. Most libraries and historical societies get copies of these things. So like in my community, our HPC has it, our historical society has it, it's on the village's website, and we have 2 copies at the library. So there's usually multiple places where you can get access to these. You're going to reach out to the libraries and historical societies because you're going to look for those newspaper articles. You're going to look for those obituary indexed, you know, died in the home, waked at the home, you know, funeral held at, and gives you the address. Doesn't mean they're haunted. Almost everybody was waked at home before the 1920s. So doesn't necessarily mean. About 3 times a year, I have people come in, I want to research the history of my house. And then like after 15 years of cagey questions, they finally say, you know, I think my house is haunted. I guarantee you it's not. You're fine. Sometimes it is, and I know it is. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. And then they're like, it's kind of fun to do that to people. But we're the ones, right? People donate family scrapbooks. People donate, you know, postcards of, so we might have photos. We might have letters. We might have family photo albums and stuff like that, newspaper clippings, scrapbooks. So reach out to the library, reach out to the Historical Society. Anybody who could have a portion of that, you know, Elmhurst University, see who has it. We're going to have those city directories, right? Those glorified phone books back in the day before everybody had a phone. And then phone books, right? That are going to tell me, you know, who the plumbers are. You know, was my, you know, owner or renter a plumber, right? They're going to be listed in those. Those street neighborhood files, which I mentioned earlier. And then some have architectural guides. So there are some generic books like upstairs. Jez has 2 copies of the historic buildings structures book upstairs in the architecture section. So if you've got a Queen Anne, like there's examples of Queen Anne's and stuff to kind of help you identify the architectural style of your house. But some communities have them already. Talked about universities. I'm not going to go through it again, but ask, right? Did the university participate in local parades every year, right? So there's photos taken of the floats. If that parade came right past your house every single year, you want to look at every one of those photos because there might be a great shot of the front or the side of your house, or cars sitting in front of the house, or what the trees look like, or the hedges or whatever. Even though it sounds unnecessary, there could be some great shots in there of your structure. So you want to look for those kinds of things too. If you're lucky enough to have these, oh my goodness, I just drew a blank on what they're called, bird's eye maps, right? A lot of communities have them, where they basically did an illustration of the community from about hot air balloon height. And these are drawn to scale. So, you know, like if this is your house, that's exactly what that house looked like, right? Drawn to scale. So you would be able to see exactly what your property looked like if there happened to be a bird's eye map of your community. So those are fabulous and they're gorgeous. Like I said, lots of newspapers. You know, we don't live in a bubble. You know, Elmhurst News is not just being reported on in Elmhurst, right? It's getting reported on in Franklin Park and in Addison and in Lombard and in Chicago and in other places, right? It's going to be in the Daily Herald. It's going to be in the Chicago Tribune. So don't just focus on, well, Elmhurst papers aren't online. Look at the community surrounding you, because people have friends and family and they work and they live in different places. So, you know, if a home catches fire, right, that's kind of big news. That could make it into the surrounding papers, right? Or if somebody's building a great brand new mansion on, you know, Addison Street, that could have made it into one of these other newspapers collections. Addison's are digitized online. Like you can find part of the Lombardian and the Lombard Spectator digitized online. Like there are bits and pieces. Elmhurst papers I could find online back to the 1960s. Before that, you want to come here and use the microfilm. You want to reach out to the Historical Society, see if they have a clippings collection. So things like sales, right? I want to look and see when this property changed hands. If there's a digitized newspaper, it's really easy, right? You put in the address or you put in the name and it's going to show you when the property went up for sale. Or section, township, range, right? It's going to show you all those sales. Delinquent taxes, right? April every year, how many of you look through to see what your neighbor's property values are? August are when the people who didn't pay their taxes are being scolded. Here are all of our delinquent property tax payers who still need to pay. So twice a year. I talked about rentals and farmers. Everybody would move the same day. It was typically just called moving day, because if I'm renting a farm, I can't move mid-season. I can't plant my crops and then move and let somebody else harvest them, right? Or I'm not going to move before I harvest. So everybody would typically move one day. And you see people, you know, Johnsons are moving to the Smith farm. Smith's moving into town, into the old Culver farms, you know, home. And the Culvers are moving to Florida. And you're just watching these people all moving on the same day, ping-ponging around the community. This is not an Illinois thing. This is something that happens nationally. But sometimes looking through the farm newspaper collections, and there's a lot of those for Illinois, will reference people moving to town. And if that's your person moving to town, even if it's in a farming newspaper, it's worth taking the time to look for it. So here's an example of one of those. So I'm gonna come over here. And this is all in town. These aren't even farms, right? So we have Frank Gilbert is moving to the Heron House on Joliet Road. Frank Yankee is moving to the John Needham House on Main Street. E.R. Gaylord to the Foreign House on Lockport Street. Frank Eaton and his home purchased for the Everett's estate on Bartlett Avenue. That's my friend's family still owns that 110 years later. You know, Mr. and Mrs. William Lockwood, you know, are moving to the Barron estate on Bartlett Avenue. Here's the trouble with this. The Barron estate could have been the owner's 3 sales ago. You don't necessarily know until you start looking at those subdivision plats and you start digging into the research and figuring out, okay, well, what is the Gaylord home? What is the Foreign House? But you see all these people ping-ponging the same day. It must have been a very crowded downtown watching these people, because that's only about a 5-block area in downtown Plainfield. But then lots of things make the news, right? Class valedictorian tells you her home address. You know, John and Nicole Smith are getting married at the house, gives you their address. So lots of life events are going to be in the newspaper, not just obits, not just somebody's being waked from the house. Births happened at home. They didn't go to hospitals. So announce the birth of their baby boy this past week, right? All of that's going to take place at home. So don't just like look for, oh, they died in 1956, I'm going to look for an obit. There's all kinds of living that takes place that you want to be looking for as well. Or people looking to hire servants or help, right? They're going to run ads. I live at this address. We're looking to hire a young lady to help clean house. That's your young lady. That's kind of cool. If you're the one looking, you know that they were looking for help. So atlas maps and gazetteers are exactly what they sound like. They're going to tell me who the owners of the property are. Gazetteers are, demographics, the school, like how many kids are in school, how many people live in town, how many churches are there. But it's still valuable information. So this is York Township. So this is the image we saw earlier. This is all of DuPage County in 1874. But here's York Township specifically. And again, these are just the owners of the property. It's not the renters, it's just the owners. So section 1, it's always going to be section 1. I can jump to 1904 and look at that 1904 map and see who's living there now. Is it still the same family or is it a different family? It's always going to be in the same spot. But we don't have walls or moats separating our townships from each other. It's usually the north side or the south side of the street. It's usually the east side or the west side of the street, right? There's nothing that necessarily says you are now in York Township. You're leaving Addison Township, right? We don't see those signs. So when you're looking at those maps, and we're looking at York Township as a standalone entity, right? What we need to be looking at is what's just to the north in Addison Township. What is just to the west, right? In this particular case, you would be looking at a Cook County map, but because you might own property that straddles that street. It's just a street, right? There's nothing, there's no wall saying that you can't own property on both sides. So you always want to put them together. And you can see these map takers did a fairly good job. Like there's little breaks. It's not 100%, but they did a pretty good job of drawing to a consistent scale. So I can say, okay, well, we've got the Buckholz family who owns this northwest quarter, right? Do they own property here? Or, does the Phillips family, do they have property somewhere else around here? And you're looking across to make sure you're not accidentally missing a larger piece of property. Scots have a tendency to do this. Scottish are notorious for hedging their bets and not having all of their property in one township or county. A lot of them straddle county boundaries just because they didn't trust government. Can't say as I blame them. Historically, like Scottish government, historically. So that carried over into their arrival in the US. So if you have a Scottish family, look across because I bet you're going to find property on both sides. And in those same atlases, again, here are our photos. So if this is one of your houses that you live in, it's kind of nice to see what it looked like as an illustration in 1874, as a photo in 1904, right? Did they own a business out of that particular home or structure? Were they a business owner themselves? I'm going to go looking for those businesses. All of this are in those atlases. And they're digitized. They're in your handout. You've got the link. Or you can look at the original books upstairs. Jess has them upstairs in the collection. This is just 1904, but there are others. And there are other types of things you can look for. Some examples, like statewide gazetteers. Once you start to get back to that really early history, and counties and cities didn't do their own directory, they did them statewide. Illinois had 3 statewide gazetteers in the 1830s, 1830, 30, 31, 33, and 39. So if you had people who were here that early, you have to look at the state gazetteer because there's not a DuPage County. It doesn't exist yet. So you have to keep that in mind. Or explanations of a community or a post office that might no longer exist, right? In like the Illinois Place Names Guide. So my business is named Tamarack after the Tamarack settlement, the Scottish settlement, which had its own post office. And I can, it tells me that that post office existed until 1892. And then disbanded, and then re-established, and then disbanded again, eventually, giving way to Normantown. And you still find that listed on a map, even though that community is long gone. So you want to look for these types of things too. City directories, same thing, like I said, glorified phone books. You're looking for the person by name, or you're looking specifically for the street address. So you want to look for that address in the city directory. They're often called crisscross directories, and upstairs they're listed, says city directories on the cabinet where they are. but they're done in 3 ways. By phone number, if you found an old ad and it had a phone number, you could look it up. By name or by address. In your case, you're going to be looking for an address. You're going to see everybody by year who's at that particular place. Did Elmhurst renumber or rename their streets? A lot of communities, as Plainfield did it in 2007. Like our old library address used to be 705 North Illinois Street. We are now 10525 South. We didn't move. We're still in the exact same location. But those changes are important. And city directories, let me go back one. We'll highlight that. It'll give you the old address and the new address. So if there was a change made, Stephen Morris has a really good census of street name changes. So if Elmhurst changed it, go in, look for Elmhurst, see if there was a change made, and they'll usually tell you the year. And then you're going to look in that city directory for something like this that tells you the new address and then in parentheses the old address. And sometimes it's a huge difference to go from 115 to 825, right? If you're looking online at Google Maps or through city directories and you're looking for 825, when you should be looking for 115, will make a difference in your research. City directories, Sanborn maps, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute, and some other real estate maps and county atlases are available digitally through the Library of Congress. So if you can't find it online through here or through IDA, Illinois, Library of Congress has a huge collection of Illinois and national property information records to look at. This particular one came from IDA, Illinois. It's the city directory for Elmhurst, but it's Elmhurst in the entire county. So DuPage County did a directory in 1924. Every city's represented. Elmhurst is one of those. And what it tells me is who is, in office. So if the house you live in, it was one of these people, that's kind of cool. Population of Elmhurst in 1924 was 8430. That's it. So when you think, oh, it's not going to show up in the newspaper, Elmhurst is too big. Oh no, it'll show up in the newspaper because Elmhurst was not too big. And then again, everybody living there. So Henry Alberer and his wife Josephine, right? He's works for Commonwealth Edison in Chicago. Here's his address and his phone number. William K. Adams, his wife is Mary. He's an accountant. He works for Thompson Company in Chicago. Again, all these guys probably taking the train downtown. He lives on Columbia. Here's his phone number. So it's giving me their employer and it's giving me their home address as well. And these are done every single year. And they're upstairs. County histories, the same thing. Be leery about county histories. While I love county histories because they're useful for telling me who the first schoolmarm was and postmaster and when the town was incorporated, nobody was fact checking. So every person who submits a biography in here is the most well-loved and best human on the planet, and everybody adores them. Nobody's ever going to submit a biography that says, I hate everybody and I'm a jerk, stay off my property. Like, you're never going to see that. So when you read these, kind of take them with a grain of salt because everybody sounds like a saint in these, but they'll give you some good history. Like sometimes they'll tell you exactly when they bought the farm, and I mean purchased it, not or they're going to tell you where their family came from or when they arrived in the county and who their spouses are, who their kids' spouses are, who their grandkids are. Everything is listed in these. So they're kind of fantastic. Again, these are available online. You can access these digitally as well. But again, I could say I'm the descendant of the Queen of Sheba. There's nobody who's going to prove it. So you want to be a little leery, but they often have lists of businessmen in town. So for Elmhurst, right, this is the 1870s. It's telling me if you're interested in lumber and coal, this is the company you're going to go to, Peter Benjamin, shoemaker, right? All of these people, hotel and saloon, right? So if, your business is in what used to be the old saloon, that's kind of a cool fact to know. Again, a lot of these are available digitally online, either through IDA, Illinois, which is the Illinois Digital Archives, and that link is in your handout already. Library of Congress. Other places where you can look, Internet Archive is a great source. It's free. All of these sites are free. It doesn't cost you a dime to look anything up in any of these resources, but you'll find a lot of these atlases and guides available through these sites. talked about Sanborn fire insurance maps. Library of Congress has them for Elmhurst, and they have them. I have a mistake in my handout. Here it says 1928. It's really 1924, but they have several years of Sanborn fire insurance maps. Why does this matter? If you're in the incorporated village of Elmhurst, then if your building catch fire, then it runs the risk of burning down anything that's near it. If you're out on a farm outside of incorporated village, if your barn burns, it's not going to impact anybody else. So you'll see when you go through these years, they've got 1893, they've got 1899, 1917, 1924. You'll see that there are big sections of what we know of as Elmhurst aren't represented there because they weren't incorporated into Elmhurst yet. So it's like a patchwork quilt of neighborhoods that had been incorporated. But it's going to show you the description of the property, just an outline. So you don't see the physical building, but how many stories, how many windows, how many doors? Is it brick? Is it wood? Is it stone? Because if my one-story wood shanty burns down, it's not going to cost the insurance company anywhere near as much as if my two-story, stone house catches fire, right? So they tell you exactly, does it have electricity or gas light? Is there gravel road, dirt road, or paved road, right? You're getting all of that information about the city and the neighborhood and the structure itself. I don't know is that blurry? Hopefully that's not blurry. So, all right, here's the railroad tracks, right? Right by downtown. Here's York. Same here. Here's York, right? There used to be a school right here, right? Now they're all individual lots waiting to be sold by 1924. There's no structures on these yet. There's structures here all the way around, right? So you can see between 1893 and 1924, here's Cottage Hill, right? Cottage Hill is on the far edge over here. Exactly how much this has changed, this corner, right by the tracks, has changed from a handful of buildings to fully built out by 1924. It's telling me the types of business it is, not the name of it. So it's telling me it's a confectionery, it's a drugstore, it's a bank, it's a clothier, it's a millinery goods store, right? It's telling me what it is, and it's giving me the address. So these are really good too to see if address has changed. Because if in this map it's address number 3, but in this map it's address number 30, they've filled in. They've had to fill in all those properties in between and give them new numbers. So these are fabulous. So it tells you the structure, and these little numbers tell you 1-story, 2-story. A, B, C, D, what type of material did they use? And at the front of every one, there's a grid that tells you what those mean. Download the grid so you know what all those numbers and explanations are. But this can be really insightful, if your property is right here, right? There was nothing there 30 years prior. So Sanborn maps, these are available through Library of Congress. You can download all of them for the city of Elmhurst. Again, remember, it's going to be a patchwork quilt because not all of Elmhurst was incorporated. But then take advantage of state and local map websites as well. I'm not going to go into any of these in specific detail, but all of these are going to have options for you to look for more modern maps or maybe additional historic maps to kind of fill in that groundwork of what you're looking for. Don't underestimate the importance of books, right? I talked about the Field Guide to American Houses. This is the one that's upstairs in the architecture section. There's 2 copies, a hardcover and a paperback. My personal favorite is Sally Light's House Histories book. It's a tiny little yellow volume. Yeah, it's a little older, printed in '89, but still incredibly relevant to doing house history research. Any of these are going to help you kind of know what to look for, the questions to ask, who to contact. All of these are going to be useful for you. And then just some additional websites that you have already in your handout. I gave you a lot more in your handout. So in your handout, you have, the Elmhurst Historical Society, the Historic Preservation Commission, the DuPage County Historical Society and Museum. Like, go through those and, reach out to them and see what type of information they have. The Historic American Building Survey, again, those landmarked properties, those kind of best examples of historic structures might appear in the Historic Building Survey that was done in the 1930s. It was a works progress administration thing that was done. all over the US. So there's lots of properties from Illinois represented in here. Check to see if your property happens to be one of them. Because if it's a great example of a particular style, it could show up in that survey. And they did, a lot of times, they would provide the home plans to the survey and exterior and interior photos. So again, interior photos are hard to come by, so you want to look for those as well. I know I went through it a mile a minute, but you have some fantastic resources available to you. The library here is a shining example. The Historical Society, the museum down the street is another great example. So utilize them often. That's what we're here for. Like we're here to help answer your questions. Any questions you have for me right now? Jazz are stunned into silence. Yes.
Do you find that most states have a similar structure of these resources? Like, obviously, I can find information on my house through these, but I'm also thinking about helping my ancestry and tracing some people. And I know some people moved to Iowa, right? So
yes. For the most part, yes. It just depends if the name of the government agency is slightly different. So if you're doing Wisconsin or if you're doing Missouri, it's the registrar, not the recorder, right? If you're in New York, it's the clerk. So if you just put in land records, Iowa land records, New York land records, they're going to tell you who the agency is that's responsible, but they're going to collect the same type of information. Now, the legal land descriptions might be different where you are in the country. Some would use rods and chains, like here in Illinois. Some would use metes and bounds. It just depends on where you are in the country. Colonial era, I mean, I've looked at records in North and South Carolina back into the 1740s. They're using metes and bounds, but they, instead of designated markers, because it was all open land, like they were using the neighbors around them. So they would say, this would be 40 meets until you reach the edge of the Johnson farm, and then you're, 3 bounds, 12 meets till you reach the McClure farm, right? And they're giving me names. They're giving me names of neighbors, which is fabulous. In Illinois, you don't typically see that. Those records are awesome. And women owned property. Don't be fooled into thinking that women didn't own property. In Illinois, they did. It wasn't until about the Civil War era that somehow women lost their right to own their own property. If you married, it became your husband's property. But there are a series of volumes that are called Dowers Rights books. Some counties have them separate. Some have the Dowers Rights statement right into the sale, where they say, I interviewed the wife separate and apart from her husband. So he couldn't influence her to say, yeah, she knows I'm selling it, right? She had to be interviewed separately saying, yes, I'm aware, because women were entitled to 1/3 of their husband's property. So if he sells it, she's entitled to 1/3. So they would interview her separately to say, are you aware and are you okay with this? And if she was like, yeah, I know, this is what's happening. And it would be a statement that would be recorded with the sale of the property. So they're a lot of fun too. But like historically, like I've looked at those colonial era records, and half of the time they were the women who owned them. It wasn't the husbands, it was the wives who owned them. So you'll see that. And when you get back far enough, if you're buying property that was sold from Native American tribes, like in Will County, we have a lot of Potawatomi sales to settlers. It was all women based. The women owned the property in the Potawatomi tribe, not the husbands. So it's the women's names you see on the sales, which is fascinating. Yes.
We moved into Elms in the mid-60s, and the area south of Butterfield, I had heard that there had been an abbey there. I can't find anything.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of what it was called. Basically, where like the Dick's Sporting Goods and there was one over there. There was one in Glen Ellen right at the top of the hill that's now a gym. But if there was, it would probably show up on these old maps. If you're dealing with purchases that are being, when you go through the recorder, it would tell you, the order that was the one selling it or buying it. That's how it would be listed. One thing to keep in mind in certain instances, like when it's government property being sold, or specifically like with cemeteries and organizations. So if I buy a plot in the private cemetery on the north side of North Avenue, and I'm drawing a blank on the name of it off the top of my head. I buy that. Like, I'm buying a piece of property. And typically, instead of being listed as Elmhurst Cemetery or whatever it's called, it's listed under trustees of. So when you're looking through like those alphabetical books, pull that. So if it's, the Order of Franciscans, or if you're going to look under order of, you're not going to look under Franciscans, if that makes sense. So if it's a religious denomination, you're not going to look under St. Procopius. You're going to look under who the Dominicans or, Franciscans or whoever, St. Vincent de Paulians, right? That's what you're looking for, if that helps. But when you're going through the property records, if you're interested in that, that's how you're going to find them. In newspapers, I would definitely go through the newspapers and just search and see if anything, like if I do a search on Abbey or what's the other term? Begins with a P. Something like that, because they might not have used the word Abbey. That just might have been what colloquially they called it. It might have had a name. Like search under all those different terms and see what comes up. Or if you could figure out what the denomination was, search on that, see what comes up. But where does that come from, right? That's, people keep passing that down because it used to be there. Like in the town of Geneva, there was a state girls' home there, right? And the state girls' home is long gone, but people still talk about where, like it's all fancy houses now, but people talk about, oh, where, the girls' home used to be in Geneva, So locally people know. So I bet you if you pick up the phone and call the Historical Society, they're like, oh yeah, it was owned by XYZ. Somebody knows. Any other questions? Online.
First, we have a suggestion from Terry that if you're looking for building permits for your house, you can send an email to foia@elmhurst.org, and the staff will look up the records provided for whatever they have on file, so they can pull that for you.
Thank you.
And then we have a question here. What if you find out something about your property that isn't so good? Does that ever happen?
Oh, it happens all the time. There's a property in Plainfield that's up for sale now. It's right at the corner of Route 59 and Renwick, if you ever go down to Plainfield for any reason. It's this tiny little white farmhouse, right? Looks terrible because the property's been farmed, but nobody's lived in it for years. And there was a young lady there who had taken her own life. So in 1906, her fiance had broken up with her to date another girl. And she had gotten up in the middle of the night, had gone down into the horse trough. It was one of those 18-inch, opened it up, climbed in and drowned herself in it. So you're going to find that. You're going to find unsavory things that happen. It depends on, all right, here's where we get onto the fence about, do you believe in ghosts or not, right? A healthy cleaning with orange oil might be appropriate in some houses, right? You want some sage? Yeah, you might want to burn some sage. It depends on what necessarily happened, but it would be unlikely in 120 years of research that you wouldn't find something that was a little like, oh, I don't know about that, right? So, I mean, it's part of the history. If you choose to share it, that's up to you. There are whole house history tours where people drive around and like where murders occurred, right? There's people who make money off of it. So but it would be unlikely you wouldn't find something that kind of made you like, so. Anybody else online? Thank you for the FOIA information. I'm glad to know that they do still have some that are available here in town. Well, my contact information is on the handout. I have business cards if you are interested, for those of you in the room. Sorry for those of you at home, because I am also a master gardener. I have seed packets, so you can go and spread sunflowers and wildflowers around town if you'd like. Please feel free to grab one of those. Otherwise, thank you for being here this morning. It was a delight.